He was overwhelmed, financially strained after a downturn, socially isolated, bullied. Did he wonder what he had done wrong, if anything? He was certainly out of place. He couldn't sleep. He was disconnected, hopeless. To quiet the negative feelings, he took drugs to fall asleep. He took too much. He never woke up. He died. It was March 30th, 1863. He was 45. His name was John H. Kennedy, and he stands before us today with so many others. But here's the thing. This was during the American Civil War. Kennedy was a Copperhead, one who opposed the war, favored negotiation with the Confederacy, and thought it should be left to individuals whether they keep slaves. Does that complicate matters? Does it change how you feel about him? Do you think less of him? Feel less connected? Do you parcel out blame more easily? Was it his fault? Do you feel less empathy? Today, overdose is the leading cause of death for people under 50. A common narrative goes like this. Someone gets hurt on the job, is prescribed painkillers, becomes addicted, and eventually takes too much and dies. But not everyone who takes pain medications becomes addicted. Others use drugs regularly to escape chaos, to feel in control, to ease pain, to find calm, to seek pleasure. The world can feel dangerously chaotic and disordered. In clubs, parties, rituals, and ceremonies, drugs help some people lean into the structureless flow of life with openness and generosity. In that sense, using drugs is a natural human activity that can expand our feeling of presence. While these people might be moving toward addiction, they are technically not addicted. But sometimes they too take too much, even just once, and die. The real question of drug use isn't about adverse chemical effects. It's relational. How drug use is a response to the world around you. Its balance of order and disorder. What it provides or withholds. Where you belong in it or don't. How you matter there or not. This world is itself always in negotiation, never settled, always up for debate. And that's because, foremost, we are still being shaped by what has come before us. Because the past is still alive. And we are all players and influencers in this world, affecting one another. It is the space of history, the feelscape of time, and that is the space I want to continue opening up today. I've used this term often, feelscape of time. Now, we, each of us, live inside feelscapes every day. Think of it this way. Most people build their days around what they like or what they don't like, what they seek or avoid. We design our worlds to affirm ourselves and our positions. We aim to feel good, mostly. These small, contained feelscapes give ballast to our lives. They are supported by agreements with people like us and disagreements with people unlike us. We believe we're right because we are right within the conditions we've set up. That is what informs the sides we take, politically and socially. Imagine these as a Feelscape narrowed into the present tense, a truncated bandwidth of time. And when all you have is that, its collapse will indeed bring despair and hopelessness. In my first 2 lectures, I began to open our individual feelscapes into wider and deeper time, so we can begin to learn to read the past, not as distant, but as the permanent, lasting work that continues to shape who we are now. To read the past in a way that keeps us open to its unfolding meaning and its effects. In history, in order to figure out where and how we stand today, we read books, documents, objects, pictures, places. And note I said read the past. This building once housed a library, a post office, a custom house, places where things were read and assessed. In the great literary works of civilization, and maybe even some personal letters, people have found consolation, inspiration, healing. So what I'm doing is developing a way to feel the past through the world around us as well. So that in reading and capaciously and openly feeling the past, my wager is that we can find the deepest sources of consolation and healing for the present. Because you cannot know who you are, how you are, what you feel, without exploring what has come before, without recognizing how you take shape in the feelscape of time. Many people have experienced a trauma as a singular emotional event in their life, or are shaped by trauma, acute or complex. Even if you feel you are not, part of who we all are is always unknown, vulnerable, open, and that is the root of all emotion. What then holds us together in this wider feelscape of time? Certainly the camaraderie of being here together, the organization of mutual aid, the arts of community, as I spoke of last time. But what's still missing in this space are the people who came before us. We share with them too the deep need for recognition. We are in a large, continuing conversation with them. A large, continuing conversation for recognition. How do we involve them more? How do we widen the feelscape of time to stand more fully with each other? When we cannot see beyond the narrow borders of our own feelscapes, we cling to the illusion that we already know who we are and what we need. And in doing so, we reduce ourselves and others into myths too simple to hold the truth. The result is isolation, erasure, and at times, death. In early America, a certain class rested on the mythology that the good, rich, and wise were most qualified to lead. Such was the feeling of Colonel Isaac Reed. His portrait hangs there, above the fireplace. Rich is easiest to understand. Men like him believed a man without money was nothing. It was the attitude of many squire-like men who had moved up from Massachusetts into Maine towns. Reed himself came from Littleton. Wise. Wise did not mean practical knowledge. It meant degrees and credentials from elite schools. Reed went to Harvard. What good means is the most ambiguous. For him, it meant being active in church and government, but always with a hierarchical mindset. He believed in a strong central government, order and authority, but run by people like him. John H. Kennedy, whose image is above me, he was born in Jefferson, just the next town over, and only had a common school education. He came to Waldoboro to study law with Colonel Reed. He wanted to get ahead. He wanted to belong, and that meant apprenticing to Reed and paying the social debts of entry into his class. Kennedy always called him Colonel Reed, a title of respect, colonel being an honorific given to prominent citizens who led local militias. Kennedy, by contrast, was familiarly called John H., which is almost childlike in comparison. But for Reed, America was already rethinking leadership. He came of age as the country was turning away from the belief that only the good, rich, and wise should rule. In fact, that debate reached its height in the making of the Constitution. But people like him continued to narrow their Feelscape into an eternal present tense. There was still room for a genteel federalist tradition of leadership in the revolutionary world, but the exact place of hierarchy in leadership was being refelt. In Waldoboro, before Reed, there was Benjamin Brown, a friend of John Adams. Brown, whose civic leadership ranged from spearheading the first town hall, to establishing schools, to providing smallpox inoculation. But Federalists like Brown and Reed felt that their way was the only way. And when they lost power, they considered seceding from the Union. At the Hartford Convention in 1814, during the War of 1812, New England Federalists such as Reed proposed breaking away from the rest of the country because they felt the wrong people were in charge and national policies no longer favored them or their wealth. Their response came from a fear of change, from losing the feeling of being in the majority. And so their stubbornness and superiority created a ruthless political culture. Federalists like them needed underlings to do their bidding, and in Waldoboro, that meant German laborers. They would be left to do the slave-like work. John H. certainly did not want to be one of them. Yet, the life of the good, rich, and wise did carry moral weight. Elder Reed, he led the temperance movement here in town, a movement against the loud and sloppy drunkenness that left families destitute and the town supporting paupers. Some of them died from alcohol abuse. But Reed's morality was cut and dry. If drunkards didn't reform, he and his allies organized vigilante committees to tear down their homes. For Reed, the only valid community space was the church. Taverns, by contrast, were dens of drinking, dancing, and disorder. And in the Reed family's eyes, tavern culture was damnation itself. This view forced other worlds to collapse if they did not conform, turning social difference into existential chaos. Their fury was palpable. They tore down houses and they barred people from church. When a group of Universalists, who were more liberal Protestants, questioning where spiritual authority resided on earth, asked to use the church, which was then located where the 80th grade high school used to stand at the top of the hill, asked to use it for a prayer meeting and a Bible study, Reed's allies barred the pulpit door. They disrupted the service and they heckled the women. They told the Universalist leading preacher that he had better not read that psalm, and if it wasn't Sunday, they would have blood on their faces. Then they tried to shout down the sermon with their own prayers. No questions, no challenges, no new ideas would be allowed. It was dominance through humiliation. John B., by the way, was one of the Maine village skeptics when it came to religion. And the Reed family was worried that he would die unconverted. I mean, maybe he was just uninterested. But he remained part of the orbit. When Universalist leader James Groton died unconverted in town, but with the belief that he would have eternal sleep, the Reeds thought it was a mere sad illusion. And anyway, good riddance to him. The Reeds themselves carried a sad, dour view of the world. Daughter, Jane Ann Reed, wrote in 1841, "I dare not venture out in these streets alone." virtue is put down and vice exalted. But of course, it was their own attitude that deepened their despair. And that is a bit sad. John H. felt differently. Early historian of Waldoboro, Samuel Miller, described his genial disposition and simplicity and carelessness of dress. Later Waldoboro historian Jasper Stahl described it as a whimsical humor and affected indifference to dress. So John H. was not dour. Even as he followed the Reeds, he did not mirror them. And the Reeds were not all of Waldoboro. Their conservatism shaped the town's reputation, but there were other ways of being most prominent here. Joseph Clark, the shipbuilder, here on my left, was everywhere. In fact, he's appeared in all of my lectures so far, unplanned, and was the wealthiest man in this area of the state at his death in 1875. He built 40 ships while living here, as well as the town's first theater, as we talked about last time, and was nationally known as far away as New Orleans as a black Republican, an anti-slavery white man. The point is that local men here were participants in a national conversation and held the widest variety of beliefs and opinions, inhabiting and opening up the wider Feelscape of the country. In fact, by 1856, anti-slavery Republicans were even gaining votes in Waldoboro. And then one man stood up and said, no, I own them. That man was young Isaac Reed, whose portrait hangs behind you there. He was born in Waldoboro, and he ingratiated himself across town life, all classes, offering patronage and jobs. Of course, in time, he then punished businesses and individuals who didn't support him. He took jobs away from those who refused to vote as he ordered. Young Isaac was responding to the national conversation, particularly the complexity of its emotional state, but he was also enacting a family drama, claiming power his father never fully attained, and projecting the family's imagined national influence onto Waldoboro. He was making his family's story the town's story. It was him who secured the site for this building, the new custom house, on his own land, as we discussed last time. And there's an illustration of it next to him on the wall, just as it was completed in 1857. Meanwhile, John H., he was rising too. Leading lawyer, county attorney, eventually state representative. Another leading lawyer of his day said, quote, Kennedy's plain, simple manner of addressing a jury makes him a hard man to meet, end quote. But he was also remembered deemed honest, generous, congenial. He built the brick home that still stands right across the entrance to Store Lumber. It's pictured here to my right as it was in its heyday. Young Isaac, he did what he said, and he delivered enough votes in Waldoboro to James Buchanan, a conservative candidate for the presidency, and was rewarded by President Buchanan by giving an appointment to John H. to be the first collector of customs here, a very remunerative post. And of course, John H.'s office was in this very room that we sit. He was the first person to work in this room. Thus, the building became a fortress of the Reed machine. A photo in the corner on the left shows stern men seeming to guard its doors. And in fact, that photograph was printed as a stereograph, which meant it was to be seen in 3D. And as the building embodied federal authority, it also magnified young Isaac's ambition. In 1857, a map of Lincoln County featured 3 Waldoboro landmarks when most other towns, all of them, had only 1 or 2. And those 3 landmarks were the Custom House, Kennedy's home, and Reed's home. which is behind you on the other side of the window, and which is now the site of the Waldo Theater, just outside the window. All three of these images are from that map. That same year, Reed and his allies, they proposed making Waldoboro the county seat. They failed, as the creation of new counties around that time were reshaping the geographic center, but their ambition and their entitlement was unmistakable. Historian Jasper Stahl remarked in his history of Waldoboro that the Reed family were, quote, men without a country, and that under their sway, Waldoboro too could feel that way. They seemed to be part of a different conversation, more aligned with the shipping economy of the slaveholding South than with the broader United States. But again, it was simply that their Feelscape stretched far, but thin. In 1857, when someone nearby raised a border ruffian flag, which was a pro-slavery banner at the time, General William Corcoran of Waldoboro, once a Reed follower, said that's it, and became an anti-slavery Republican. The Reed machine retaliated by digging an impassable ditch to cut off his just reworked property from Main Street. By contrast, at the time, in the newspaper, it was noted that Reed's house had a stone fence to protect it, which is the stone fence, portions of which weave around us and the Waldo today. That same year, Reed and his allies staged a spectacle within the fence's walls. They hosted Jefferson Davis, soon to be president of the Confederacy, right here in Waldoboro. And who drove Davis through town on his fine chase? Loyal Lieutenant John H. He must have been so proud. And the evening culminated just next door in a genteel dinner at Reed's house. John H., who was also then a division advocate for the local militia, reported no new enrollees in 1859, even as the nation boiled. In fact, Stahl notes that in 1858, the year before, the Waldoboro Rifle Company reported 41 members present for inspection. So perhaps Reed and his circle were in denial or outright defiance of the mounting crisis, who knows. But not everyone felt anywhere near the same. When Lincoln was elected, some residents in town lit candles in their windows. And of course, Joseph Clark strung an American flag across Main Street between his theater, which is where the parking lot is right now, and the building opposite. When men told him to take it down, he stood outside with a rifle just there and said, "Touch it, and you'll catch a bullet." Do today's flag wars on that same corner ring a bell? When the war came, the leading men of Waldoboro had little choice but to align themselves with the Union, at least nominally. Republicans and Democrats joined together to present a united front. And the more willing and amenable Democrat who took the lead in this unlikely alliance was Bella Haskell, who was the father of same-sex loving Harriet Haskell, the subject of my first lecture. And he is pictured there with his wife. Their house was just across the street. It's still standing. It's now an art gallery. But John H.'s fortunes, they took a turn. The Collector of Customs was a political appointee, and with Abraham Lincoln in office, that post here in this very room went to Republican Sebastian Marble, future governor of Maine. So this very room became the town's most prominent space where allegiance visibly shifted. The rest of Waldoboro did not erupt in Union fervor. While Maine as a whole sent more men per capita to fight for the Union than any other northern state, Copperhead-inflected areas like Waldoboro lagged. Men had to be paid bounties to enlist. $110 for the soon-to-be famed 20th Maine Regiment, even more for the 21st. Some coastal men slipped away on ships to avoid service. With labor short, fishermen's wages rose. Yet when troops from neighboring towns, buoyed by a surge of Union spirit, marched through Waldoboro toward Rockland for training, Joseph Clark fired off a cannon in salute. So which was louder here? Resistance or retrenchment? Which feelings had more power? Historian Stahl, thought opposition to the war went underground, surfacing only in draft resistance, votes, and editorials in newspapers. I think it wasn't hidden so much as bottled up, compressed. One story among many shows it. Two draftees, a Copperhead and a Union loyalist, prepared to ship out from Waldoboro. The Copperhead slapped the Union loyalist on the back as a fellow brother conscript. The Union loyalist turned and punched him in the jaw. The message was clear. Don't assume I'm just like you or whatever you imagine me to be. Don't tell me how to think or how to vote. What we're seeing or feeling is not two clean, opposing viewpoints, but again, a bottleneck of tangled feelings, tangled loyalties, and tangled identities. Historians Stahl often cast Waldoboro's Germans, the town's majority, as holding to feudal family values, deferring to English elites, the good, rich, and wise, but with a souring taste in their mouths. That deference, he added to a community-wide, quote, cup of bitterness. Workers did, no doubt, absorb their boss's sentiments. They labored side by side, and those men paid their wages. But what we need to recognize more is that everyone has a breaking point, when their sense of self becomes too contracted. No one wants to be swept up entirely into someone else's order of the world, holding someone else's bitterness. The phrase, cup of bitterness, well, that came from a speech by Frederick Douglass at the time, who was drawing on scripture to say that Yahweh's wrath was to pour on those who, in the United States, supported slavery. The nation had been brought to a reckoning, Douglass warned, and those people would taste it. But what was the bitterness of? What was slavery about to people here who had never seen it firsthand? It was, most generally, about value and how it was measured differently across the country. Whose labor counted? Where was value to be found? Who felt taken advantage of? Who felt degraded? Northern laborers worked to hold the Union together by helping build its economy, but the national scales were now really way off. Some of the wealthy wanted to, now in the South, wanted to rewrite the rules and pull out of the Union and run off with the value built on the backs of everyone else across the country. And remember, the New England elites had even toyed with secession too when their money was at stake. And this simply wasn't fair. It's not a neat moral question about an issue. Men who fought for the Union were not necessarily in lockstep around the issue of slavery. Their motivations rose from shifting values, and so shifting fears and shifting hopes. It was more emotional than ideological, and for that reason, more powerful and unstable. The underground, whatever went underground, for everyone was not a coherent truth waiting to rise, but uncertainty itself, motivating people in ways they themselves could not always articulate. And that was darkly bitter indeed. Despite his wealth, Elder Reed was haunted by what he had not achieved, haunted by not holding the value he thought he deserved. He dreamed of becoming a national figure, but he was forgotten. We can feel some empathy for that. Believing he was owed recognition, but failing to secure it, that hardened him. His demeanor grew bitter and stubborn, not only from pride, but from disappointment. The same was true of his son. In 1845, young Isaac confessed in a letter to his brother Charles that he felt lonely in Waldoboro, just as he was taking over from his father as head of the family machine. And the following year, he complained that another brother, another son of Elder Reed, William, had broken away politically, becoming what Stahl called the black sheep of the family, anti-elite, reformist, proto-populist, siding with what Isaac derisively called the anti-custom house party. A third brother went west in search of gold. He never became rich, but he wrote home with a kind of resigned grace, learning to accept and adapt. His tone was different, gentler than Isaac's. How must Isaac have felt? Stuck in Waldoboro, clinging to the maxim, a man without money is nothing? Was he trying even harder to disprove it? But disappointment, loneliness, vulnerability are hard things to admit. Few want to speak openly about not knowing what comes next or about being driven more by uncertainty than by certainty. Yet these were the dark undercurrents of the Reed family story, of Waldoboro's cup of bitterness, of the larger Feelscape of time that threatened to seep into the surface show of the town and the country. Had wealth trickled down to the poor of this town? Not really. People here were really, really poor. Did the wealth spread? A little. For most workers, access to prosperity was tightly controlled by the Reed family. When Isaac stripped contracts from those who didn't vote his way, maybe they found work with Joseph Clark or another builder, but when the broader shipbuilding economy collapsed alongside the collapse of slavery, there was little work anywhere. Wartime shortages made matters worse. Ships, of course, were still needed, but not enough to rescue anyone. And in those cracks, smaller farmers, laborers, could begin to feel differently. They could start to push back against their bosses, not as a whole cultural group like the Germans. It was more uneven, more individual. Resentment grew. And yet a deeper spirit, a spirit of Maine, of union, of neighborliness, of mattering to one another simply because survival required it, surfaced through that resentment. It was that spirit that animated resistance to the Copperheads. It showed up not in great speeches, but in gestures, from that punch delivered to a fellow conscript's jaw, and to the destruction of John H.'s carriage, the very carriage in which he had proudly paraded Jefferson Davis through town. That carriage, proud symbol of elite connection, was publicly burned right here in town by the local men about to ship out as Company A of the 21st Maine Regiment, 1862. Whereas the Copperheads had once dug ditches to destroy a Republican's driveway access, these men destroyed a Copperhead's smooth conveyance around town. Their act was not only or even mostly patriotic defiance, one side against another. Many of them had been pressured to enlist. They were lured by bounties. Their act was foremost one of anger. Anger at having to go to war. Anger at the attitudes of elites like the Reeds. Anger at being told by those elites how to act, how to think, and how to feel. Sound familiar? It was, in effect, a way of saying, don't pass that cup of bitterness to us. You drink it. This is your reckoning. For John H., the reckoning was personal. His fortune was diminishing, and he too became a man without a country, even in his own town. Stahl also recalls the gospel line, quote, where a man's treasure is, there is his heart also. If John H.'s treasure was his wealth, what was left of his heart? But is money the only wealth meant in that gospel verse? Perhaps John H. was also a man without a family. He stood by Isaac Reed when Reed's own family fractured politically. Yet it was John H.'s carriage that the townsmen destroyed, not Reed's property. Did he feel abandoned? Did he even feel he belonged among the Reeds? But he had that whimsical humor and affected indifference in dress that made him a kind of village institution, Stahl says. So did he feel out of place, even among his peers? If he had, like the Reeds, renounced the Union, did he feel guilty now for having gone along? Gullible, perhaps, or trapped? One of the most widely read stories of the Civil War era was Edward Everett Hale's The Man Without a Country. And that's actually where Stahl got the phrase he used to describe the Reeds, men without a country. And of course it applies to Kennedy too. Hale was a prominent Unitarian in sympathy with the Universalists once barred from Waldoboro's pulpit. His story was aimed directly at Copperheads, draft resistors, and those who tried to tune out the war. The tale follows Philip Nolan, a bright, eager, ambitious soldier drawn to Aaron Burr, proud and imperious, dreaming of founding his own nation, just like Elder Reed. When Burr falls, Nolan follows and is convicted of treason. In court, he cries out that he never wants to hear the name of the United States again. And so his punishment? lifelong exile at sea, with the name of his country never to be spoken in his presence again. For 50 years, Philip Nolan drifts among ships, forgotten. Once eager to be a hero, he becomes nobody, with only a rotating cast of sailors for company. But it's in that condition when he comes to feel more and more the need for home. He realizes that for his sacrifices to mean anything, he needs to belong to something larger, a nation, a community, a home that could honor him. And without that, he was nothing. Nolan, in the story, he died in 1863, Kennedy's year too. He died clutching his father's Revolutionary War Mutual Aid Society medal. And in his cabin in the ship, Nolan had hidden an American flag. Here in Waldoboro, a ship called the Union Flag was built and launched out to sea in 1861, the first year of the war. And can you believe it? The next ship built and launched out to sea from here bore Kennedy's own name, the John H. Kennedy, off to sea. Or, as men who slipped draft duty by boarding ships went off, as one newspaper put it, to the undiscovered country. A phrase, of course, from Hamlet, meaning death or the unknown after death. Kennedy was drifting. Where was he to go? His last years were clouded, Stahl writes. The world was collapsing, overwhelming. His feelings were all present tense. The cup of suffering is the cup Jesus asks to have taken from him. Yet, it is not taken. Am I born to suffer and die, he asks. What does that question mean in reality before theology? Jesus is left alone, forlorn, betrayed by friends who want to sleep even while he cannot. John H. could not sleep, Stahl tells us. So he bought a sleeping powder, mixed it with liquid, and seeking to bottle up the forces that had swamped him, to control them at last, he drank the cup. He entered the undiscovered country and was gone. Never to wake up. The doctor who gave him the dose also left town. But the Union won the war! And where are we now? Do you feel more together today as a country? Blame is so cleanly parceled out. It's that side's fault. That person's doing. Oh, we love to use the word hate for our enemies' actions. They're so hateful. We're drawn to the idea of clear villains and heroes, of compelling bad actors. And our leaders love to play those simple roles. The drama of good and evil is easy and seductive. Popular history, especially by the most followed historians on social media, too often collapses into sides, into lists of the good and the bad, into clear, easy lessons about how we got here and how to get out. But how deep does that history go? Does it touch who and how you are? For Jasper Stahl, history was personal. Returning to Waldoboro with his educational credentials, he asked not only how did this place come to be and what was its place in the nation, but what does it mean to be a good leader here? What does it mean to be from here? What does it mean to be me? All these images in the forms you see hanging on these walls, including, tellingly, his own portrait, Jasper Stahl, in the corner, all of them come from Stahl's published history of the town. Even as the politics shifted, even as party names changed hands, Stahl was wondering, how does a place remain a certain way over time? And what does it have to do with the people who lived here? His last chapter stretched into the 1950s. As we explored last lecture, the feelings of people being here, deposited in the attitudes of a place, they seep into its buildings, not identical to them, but shaping their feel, just as buildings in turn shape the people who use them. That congregational church on the top of the hill, well, that's gone, but the feeling of being barred from a church is very present for some. And while this building still stands, the feelings of it continue to change. Shown in the old photograph in the corner, as a building where stern men seem to guard its doors, the building now appears in a new image on the adjoining wall, gesturing toward and beyond that past, to afford the people who stand outside it the recognition we all need, to become a space for healing. My point has been this. The past and its ghosts live on not by haunting us from outside, but because we continue to inhabit their spirit in the feelscape of time, in forms more open and sometimes more closed. Not so much what they felt, but the feeling of what they said and the feeling of what they did. In this way, the ghosts of the past do not float. They stretch and become the emotional textures of a place, the positions we inhabit in relation to each other. Stahl felt this too. And to explain what he felt, he argued that master needs servant, servant needs master, that there is a fit between leader and follower. He traced German feudal families' values alongside English notions of natural elites across centuries. He saw Waldoboro as a place where these types locked together neatly, giving the town its ongoing political and social feel. And in his view, that fit also bred what he called, quote, a powerful class hatred that served to cripple the development of the town for upwards of a century. That's an astute take, but he was following the loudest, most controlling, though never the most numerous, voices in the room. Hence its dour, even angry cast. For what of a town that grows, that doesn't only close in on itself? We know there is always resistance in a community, even conflict always within each of us. Not conflict preordained in the play of good and evil, but unavoidable conflict derived from encounter, from bumping against each other, from living and working across difference as we all reach for something new and visionary. For what creates a community of possibility and purpose is not fitting into roles, but becoming part of something larger, building a shared project. And that conflict does inevitably bring resentment, especially when trust is betrayed. And it calls for an emotional resistance, for assertion and for questioning. We may even feel the need to tell our own stories so not to be swamped by someone else's. I have to say I'm deeply suspicious of this urge for storytelling. In the most mass media public venues, people offer some brand of complete knowledge of redemption even through the stories that they trumpet. This is because stories, at any level, can tie and bind things more tightly into truncated feelscapes where, yes, things are made sense for you. But if you don't find a place in them, you can feel increasingly anxious or despairing. Just as we adapt in order to fit in, especially the world in which we are born into, we tell stories to fit things together. But in history, we pull things apart. We set things and people in relation. We explore the space between them, the space of causation, where history is not a record of what we know, but an opening into what we don't. The people who don't fit into another person's narrative tend to be those who subvert standard narratives of desire, who challenge boundaries rather than impose them. They are pretty good community actors. Harriet Haskell, the subject of our first talk, she was one of them. Jasper Stahl, he was as well. For him, doing history meant being emotionally open to what it has meant to be present in the place you live over time. Tending the past. Tending to the vulnerability of people you encounter in the Feelscape of time. It was Stahl who first included the details about John H.'s death in the town's history, who was drawn to the feeling of scenes. His literary sensibility was essential. He listened for the action between the lines. So many of us, when faced with uncertainty, rush to fill that space with types, diagnoses, categories. These can help people be heard. They can help us be taken seriously. But ultimately, they reduce us. They bind us. They make us feel unfree, with nowhere else to go. Dictating how we should feel, often in the name of help, and smothering us with someone else's ordering of the world. And that appears as stigma. And that's where the disorder and division actually arises. In refusing to acknowledge the vulnerable space we all inhabit together at every moment, that dark side we most fear as it opens time around us. And yet, it is there, in that space of vulnerability, where we are most ourselves, feeling absolutely distinct and at the same time, most like others, feeling absolutely akin. We feel the limits of life and the fallibility of all people. And that recognition of limitation and fallibility, that is empathy. It is painful and it is pleasant. It comes in fleeting moments like all emotions, and it opens a space of feeling more. A looseness of expression that actually can be joyful. It is what we feel in a room of diverse people talking, laughing, debating. The structureless flow of a party, the art of community. It is, above all, a feeling of freedom, of equality even, that simultaneously connects us with something larger, with other people, and with the past as future, as history begins to heal us. It is the feeling on which the country is based. A feeling of revolution and of union. A feeling broad enough to include those left out on paper when the country began. Can we sit wondering how we fit into the picture of this big feeling? Not assigning, but wondering at the meaning of this American flag. Of these two Civil War soldiers' hats and the relation between their wearers. Shifting between what we recognize for ourselves, what surrounds us in our life, and all the more it might mean. All the unknown space between. Feeling in that shift, yes, I am part of something. And I am me. My sense is expanded. I am not hopeless. I feel an immense sense of purpose.